before I introduce today's speaker, welcome everybody to Social Exclusion Seminar. I'm Abigail McKnight, and I co-organised the series with Laura Lane, who's there. She's going to be assisting today in fielding the online questions as people are joining us online. Just to let you know, Stephen's agreed for us to record the...
Have I? Yes, I have. On my behalf, yes.
And we'll make that available after the seminar. It's not the Q&A, it's just the presentation. And also we'll put a link to the paper. There's a paper behind this presentation. We'll put a link to the paper so people can find that easily. In terms of the seminar series for the rest of the term, we've got 2 more seminars. The next one's on the 10th of June. Chrissy Gale's going to be talking about co-designing participatory research with alternative care experienced children and young people worldwide. That's ambitious. And then on the 24th of June, Fran Bennett and Ewan Robertson are going to be presenting some of their research on comparing policy efforts to integrate means-tested benefits in France and the UK. So think about universal credit in the UK and what's been tried in France. It's going to be a really interesting seminar. So Stephen's got up to 45 minutes to do his presentation. Points of clarification as we go along, but main questions, please, at the end. When it comes to the Q&A, if you could introduce yourself before asking your question, that would be very helpful. And for people in the room, if you can speak up so that people online and the microphones can pick you up, people online can hear you. But I'll remind you of that when we get onto the Q&A. But I'm delighted today to introduce to you our speaker, Stephen Brien. He's the chair of the Social Security Advisory Committee. He's passionate about finding solutions to reduce poverty and improve the lives of the most vulnerable in the UK. Very much at the heart of the work that we also do here at CASE. Previously, he was a director of policy at the Legatum Institute. And in addition to overseeing the Institute's policy programmes, his research is focused on socio-economic drivers of prosperity around the world. Prior to that, or overlapping a bit with that, he was an advisor to governments of both Middle East and sub-Saharan Africa, and he's been a director of social finance and advised the UK Department for Work and Pensions. Today, Stephen's going to be talking about some research commissioned by the committee, looking at the influence of the social security system on education and vocational decision-making at the age of 16. It's a really interesting seminar. The paper's really worth reading. It's highlighting an issue that's been overlooked, I think. And so I'm delighted to see this agreed to come and present today. So over to you, Stephen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's kind words of introduction. So let me maybe just quickly introduce the Social Security Advisory Committee and our remit to give a little bit of context for the work that we've done. So we are an independent body set up by statute in 1980, and our role is to provide independent and impartial advice to the Secretary of State. We do that in 2 ways. Most of our day job is spent scrutinising regulations. So every piece of secondary legislation that is put in place comes, with respect to Social Security, comes to our committee first as a committee of experts to review it, ensure that it delivers against the underlying policy intent. And the idea is Social Security, as I'm sure you're all very familiar, is quite a detailed technical area. And the expectation was that MPs and others would not necessarily have all the technical skills to be able to scrutinise legislation. So we as a body have been set up to provide that extra advice. Now, as part of this, we also want to stay on top of the developments of Social Security so that we're able to advise the Secretary of State in what we call our independent work program, where we think there are areas that are neglected. We are not campaigning for particular policies. We're more saying, in the broad scheme of things, have certain areas been underlooked, under-reviewed, or are there reasons why a well-informed but independent body can help stimulate debate within the department? The department is a very large organization, is a machine. It gets trapped, as all organizations do, into certain forms of groupthink and stovepipe thinking, that's a structural issue. It's no reflection on the individuals. It's the nature of the beast. And part of what we can do is provide a little bit of an antidote to that. And that's where this report comes in as a piece of work that we felt was an emerging issue and that had been neglected. And there wasn't necessarily a natural home within the policy units of either the department or indeed other adjacent departments such as DFE to look into this. And one of the comments that I had in a conversation with the Permanent Secretary about it was that we were taking, and he particularly picked up on this, we were taking a longitudinal view. We were thinking about the experience of a journey of people from ages 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and thinking through a set of decisions they're making and how the combined system, as it were, affected those decisions. And in his reflection, hence my point about stovepipes, is, he's got oodles of policy teams, but they sort of own products, as it were. There's a DLA and a child DLA and a PIP team over here. There's a UC team here. There's another team there, and they're busy dealing with their products. But actually, the way the department is set up is that you don't have, as it were, a sort of customer claimant focus that looks across all the pieces naturally within the system. So that's what we were doing, and it's often an area we do get involved in, because unlike, again, the policy units, we, in our role scrutinizing legislation, see lots of disparate issues and see the overlaps that often the specialist teams don't see. So combine that with two other major triggers. Obviously, the Milburn Review, which actually started after we started our work, but this issue of NEETs and their experience and the emerging problem was very much in the water, so to speak, beforehand. So that was very much on our mind. And then secondly, two independent triggers. One was Chris Goulden of Youth Futures, who was actually formerly a committee member, came to us and said, look, I've been working on this area for a while now, and I'm seeing some real issues about the way apprenticeships are being handled within the system when you think about education policy, welfare policy, etc. And I think this is a thing that the committee could work on. On one level, we listened to him. We thought there's something interesting going on here. You've always got to be a little bit careful about special pleading from friends, as it were. So we weren't going to jump in and say, hey, this is really important. One of our friends told us about it. But then something else happened. Brent Council, interesting enough, approached both Minister Stephen Timms and ourselves about an issue that they were seeing, which is slightly more niche, but actually very, very important, which was around young carers. So these are people who are doing God's work, caring often for sick relatives, often parents, holding the family together, trying to create their own life plan, and were being stymied by a system that actually was preventing them from investing in their own futures, because there were restrictions about how many hours of education they could do while still getting the carers award. So you had this situation where one part of the world was saying, look, this is fantastic, these young carers looking after their parents, we want to support them financially. But because of the sort of paradigm within which carers allowance had been established, the amount of time you were spending doing other things was used as a way of making sure that, like policing, you were spending the time on caring. But what that meant was that these young carers were being told their life chances were a trade-off between getting some money to support them because their family hasn't got much income because they're looking after a disabled relative, versus actually trying to juggle everything and invest in their own futures. So we thought, okay, right, well, there really is something going on here. It's not just an inside track from Chris, we were seeing other things. So we said, okay, let's set up this research. And as I say, look at this longitudinally, look at how all the different systems interact. What is that journey? So we were very lucky to have the support of a PhD student, Lauren Shields, who is part of a program of PhD students we have coming in for 3, 6, 9 months, working mostly part-time on a particular issue to complement their own research, give them an opportunity to work in a slightly different environment. I mean, we maintain high standards, but it's not the sort of technical academic standard. It's also working more as a team, impacting policymakers. So it's a chance for people to get their hands a bit dirtier than they might in a purely academic environment. And we were, I think, very lucky that Lauren came in with a research background that involves a lot of interviewing and researching and be able to sort of, engage with people to distill information. So, we did a twin track process then of saying, okay, well, let's do the sort of standard analytic work. What does the benefit system say? Let's look at all the different types of families and what do we see as they go through this journey. And then let's do some more, ethnographic work in terms of interviewing school kids as they approach that, interviewing the teachers as influencers, interviewing parents to work out, what they knew about the system, how they guided their children, and also interviewing both senior policymakers and operational staff, who, of course, tell you the real story. You got to find out from the sort of the directors of the department and DFE, what the official line is, and then you go onto the ground. And we went to Worcester, where there's actually a fantastic youth hub, and they've done some really, really. I've sent a lot of people there. They must be getting tired of the number of senior bods and number 10 and elsewhere who are turned up in Worcester wanting to be told. But they've brought together, and this is, I think, really brilliant. They've brought together in the library, which does make a difference about normalizing it, careers advice, health and disability support, the job centre, and so forth. So actually people think, what? I'm not being siloed into I'm an unemployed person going to the job centre, or I've got a health and disability issue that's constraining my potential, or I'm a 16-year-old who wants to think about a career versus other choices. It's all part of the mix. I mean, when we were there, we got some absolutely, both brilliant from a research point of view, but also harrowing and frustrating from a human point of view about the situation. So I'll come on to that in a minute. But to start with the analytic work, we looked at a set of different family types. Those who were high earners, low earners, on benefits, different types of benefits, etc., and thought about the journey a 16-year-old son or daughter may go through. And if you think about the setup, right, 15, you're definitely, part of the family unit. From a benefits point of view, you are considered, one of the members of the family. Getting your child benefit, your universal credit child element, and so forth, depending on, and indeed other disability benefits if that's appropriate. But you're very definitely within a family unit. There's an adult there who's effectively the benefit holder, but you're counted there as a dependent. And if you think about somebody, you certainly have to go up to nearly 21, 22 these days because of the way disability benefits operate. But at that age, you may still be physically living in the house, but you're now treated very much as an independent person. You're expected to be earning your own wage, or have, if you're not earning, you have your own benefit unit. There may be some non-dependent deductions that are organized to manage the flow of rent, but you're not expected to be sharing food costs or anything. Right? So we've got to get from this point of view of being independent over here, age 22, and you start age 15 being truly dependent. What are the steps that you go through, and do those make sense? And does the benefit system align with the education system, align with the employment system? And are they all helping in the same direction? To cut the story to the end of the story, of course, the answer is no. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been writing the report. But what we started to see was a world in which the highest earning families had, in effect, the smoothest progression. So what do I mean by smooth progression? Well, as the participation rate has gone up from 16 to 18, we're in a world where successive governments have stated that their policy is that everybody up until the age of 18 is engaged in productive activity, employment, training, etc. Obviously, education is part of that mix as well. And at one level, the official line is we're neutral. We want to work out, we want horses for courses, and that's appropriate. Different people are going to need different routes. So we can sort of do the sheep dip until 16, but then as people mature and their opportunities and their aspirations and their capabilities become more distinct, we recognize there are going to need to be various pathways. And top down, we don't want to discriminate against one pathway or in favor of another because everybody has to find their own way. So in that world, let's start at the sort of the top end. If you're a higher rate tax-paying family, no child benefit, no nothing. Your child's age 16, may stay on in sixth form, may go to college, may seek an apprentice job. And you know what? It doesn't really seem to matter too much. Because actually, from the point of view of benefits, tax, etc., there's no signaling going on, right? The kid makes a choice, you support them or not as a family, very, very neutral. Next step down, you're a lower rate tax-paying family, not on benefits or anything, just, ordinary, as it were, a very ordinary setup. And then you look at the situation age 16. They could stay on in school. They could get an apprenticeship. Let's just take a very simple example, or college. If they stay predominantly in education, either sixth form or in college, child benefit is maintained, hunky-dory. They decide to take an apprenticeship, they lose the child benefit. And look, at that point, right, at that level of financial setup, the apprenticeship wage certainly will be more than the child benefit. And the family's got a degree of financial resilience. And at least net, if they go down the apprenticeship route, the total income into the family is higher. It's not split the same way, but at one level, it's part of that journey of the child becoming youth, becoming young adult, becoming more independent. And we can't have a very smooth continuum. There'll be a few edges, sort of okay. Now, what I'm sort of giving you is a little bit of, we were discussing earlier, it's a little bit of a sort of a middle class lens on this issue, right? That's sort of, we've got to make decisions. We're going to support the kids. We can afford to. And at some point in a few years' time, he or she is going to be fleeing the nest. So we may as well get used to them becoming more independent. Okay, next step down. Let's think about, a less financially secure family on universal credit. They may or may not have employment, but they're certainly, in more tighter financial situation. And not only now is the child benefit going to be at risk if a young person decides to take an apprenticeship, but the child element of universal credit is also at risk, particularly if they're the last or the only person in their household as a child. So what you start to see is two things are like a scissors coming together, right? You've got a family whose financial resilience is less, and therefore every penny counts more. And you've got a benefit system that at one level, as a function of its greater generosity, while the child is young and appropriately greater generosity, the cliff edge is greater at this point. So the 16-year-old in a universal credit household is facing a much bigger dilemma. Because again, depending on the circumstances, the apprenticeship may give more money overall, but there's a much bigger transfer away from the parents. So you've got a situation then that starts to create friction in the family, tension. There's no presumption of sharing to start with. This isn't the same as two adults forming a household together, and there's as it were, voluntarily coming together to create a household. There's a reasonable presumption of sharing between those two. This is a young person who's actually en route to independence. And the first thing we're asking them to do is to presume that they will share all their in their eyes, their hard-earned cash with their parents or parent to compensate for the lack of benefit income that's just come in. So one level, you're saying to this kid, you're earning money, you're about to become independent, welcome to the real world. But by the way, please give 80% of your money back to your parents to pay for the rent and the food, etc. And you're dealing with a group of people for whom, as I say, every penny counts a lot more. So you start to see problems. And actually, this is then when the ethnographic work really starts to come into its own. Because when we talked to people on the ground, we started to hear stories that told us this is not just simply a financial issue. Because actually, my little points about tension were very real. We were hearing stories of people who were, having family rows about this. A young girl who was kicked out of her home by her mother because the mother couldn't afford to keep her because she was on an apprenticeship. People who then discover after the fact that this is happening and then dropping out of apprenticeships and then basically losing a year of their life in terms of their educational development because they've dropped out because they can't afford, but they can't get into anything else. She's already, okay, crikey, this is a problem. And then you start saying, this system is not just broken, but it categorizes people. And it's based on an old-fashioned decision around what makes somebody independent in a house. And that is, are they engaged in meaningful work? And there's been a decision to categorize an apprenticeship as meaningful work. On one level, that's sort of not wrong. But when you look at the knock-on consequences, you see a real issue. So let me give you a parallel. Imagine a young person, I'm going to caricature a little bit, but just to keep it quite simple. A young person who, age 16, wants to become, let's say, a hairdresser or a barber. They face a choice. They could go to college and get training and then find a sort of evening or weekend job to top up their income and practice and get experience. Or they could do an apprenticeship, structured apprenticeship. Now, I've deconstructed this deliberately because at one level, the activities and the function of those two options, pretty well the same. Training and practice, some income. Over here, training and practice and some income. Okay. So whatever, a couple of years on, the two individuals have basically achieved the same thing. They have built up a skill and they've earned a little bit of money along the way, and they're now ready to earn more money. On one side, we've sort of got and this is why I start talking about a sort of middle-class paradigm. We've got a route of somebody who's in education, earning a little bit of money on the side. Actually, we shouldn't tax them. That shouldn't affect anything else. They're only just earning pocket money. And the system is basically like that. If you're a young person and deemed to be dependent because you're still in education, and you bring money into the household as a result of a part-time job, the state, in effect, turns, deliberately, this isn't a lacuna, deliberately turns a blind eye to that. And there are good policy reasons to do that. But then you're over here and you've put a wrapper around something which the state would encourage and say, look, don't just go to college and do a bit of part-time. Let's structure it as an apprenticeship. I'm going to put this wrapper around it. It's just a wrapper. But now the system calls it meaningful employment. And that's real money. This is a pocket money over here, but this is real money. And as a result of that, child benefit goes, child element of tax credit, universal credit goes, all because we put a wrapper around it. So my point being, the system is very much penalized against certain forms. You add into that then, if the child, a young person, has had a disability, then the losses are even greater. So 300 quid a week you could lose. You've got this choice again. This is going to be a much more challenging decision for people, a much more difficult issue. How do I take some of the most disadvantaged children who are going to have some of the biggest barriers in their adult lives and make sure that we do the right thing for them in terms of them building their capacity, ages 16 and 17. And we absolutely say to anybody in that situation, just keep them in school, keep the sheep dip going. because anything that's tailored an apprenticeship that actually works around their capabilities and their capacity, I'm going to absolutely nail you and clobber you financially. So what you now start to see is not only the lack of a level playing field, but an incredibly tilted playing field, because the most disadvantaged families and the people for whom this choice can ultimately probably have some of the biggest differences if they get it right versus wrong, because they've got less to fall back on, are those who are facing the greatest financial penalties for exercising a choice that the government, and I think, I'm not disagreeing with it, but the government has said should be a level playing field. We should be able to find our own path through this system, taking the options that are best for us, whether it be an apprenticeship, whether it be seeking to go to university, whether it be going to college for more vocational style training. So that, in a nutshell, is the issue. And you get to the even more disadvantaged, say, care leavers, those who've fallen out with their family or in temporary accommodation, and you get even bigger problems. Now, the government has, we've raised this with the government a while ago as we were writing the report, and they telegraphed in the autumn statement they're going to do some work on that. And I've been talking to Stephen Timms about how that can be taken further, so that you don't end up in a position that, as it were, the most vulnerable of all, who the state recognizes are vulnerable, yet in order to get support for temporary accommodation, cannot be engaging in the activities that they need to engage in to build up their human capital. So what can be done about this? I think there's a few tactical things. In the very short term, issues such as run-ons and child benefit and other support through the autumn as people try and sort themselves out. Secondly, is a bigger issue about saying, what is the status of apprenticeships in the household? Should it be meaningful work? Or should we have a halfway house that says, for a certain amount of time, or for up until maybe 18, it's not, it's deemed as an equivalent of education. Because when you look at other countries who have all been going through the same phenomenon of raising the participation age, most other countries have found ways of dealing with it, some purely by age, by saying, look, we just bump everything up to 18, we kick the can down the road, but at least there's a consistency. Okay, at 18, there's no longer the requirement to be doing certain things. They're a bit older. There's more parity. Others, the French have sort of taken more of an income-related view, that while the income is below a certain level, we disregard, but once it gets above a certain level, we take it into account, so that the sort of higher paying ones can be expected to take more care of themselves, whereas the lower paying ones are not functionally different from the youngster getting a bit of pocket money of an evening or a weekend job. But then I think there's a bigger issue around what the Permanent Secretary was identifying, was a structural problem about how policy making was made, that we've got all these products, we're like wholesalers, the back of the supermarket bringing in crates of policy. Here I've got another truckload of universal credit to sell. I've got a truckload of apprenticeships. But at the front of the supermarket, we've got individual customers. Each basket looks different. And at the till, it costs a different amount. And some people have loyalty cards, some people don't. Some people are in for a weekly shop. Some people are doing top up. And how do they get there? And we don't have that mindset in policy making to think through all the journeys that people are on and how to make sure that well-intended parts of the system don't compound a problem. And this is something that, in my conversation with the Milburn Review team, I've been really keen for them to think about, is to say, look, we've just taken one small angle of this, but the challenge Alan Milburn has writ large is, 300-something thousand needs. They're the tip of the iceberg, because there's also cycling involved. What do successful journeys look like? And I think one of the issues when you're in policy is, particularly in DWP, you're dealing with a band-aid on unsuccessful journeys, but nobody's saying, okay, how did it work for us? I'm looking around this room, I'm presuming people online, have probably had quite, the majority or the median person has probably had quite a different experience. We've had the benefit, and we don't recognize the time, we've had the benefit of, caring family environments, nurturing teachers, a system that has basically worked for us, tripping over things into school, into university, through a milk round into a job. And we don't recognize that actually, if you're not in that sort of fast-ish track, you've actually got to make your own weather all the way through the system. And I think that's where, so it's not just about the policy side, the financial incentives. It then becomes about making sure teachers are well informed, making sure the system of finding apprenticeships, where's the UCAS clearinghouse system for apprenticeships? That means you don't have to run from pillar to post. I know it's coming, right? But there's a long way to go to get it to be the equivalent of a clearinghouse for universities. Why is it that those with the most human capital and social capital also have the easiest systems to work through? Whereas actually, it's the ones with the fewest connections who are struggling to find the right thing who actually should have the easiest to use, most supportive systems. What about the tracking? We see big differences, say, in England versus Scotland versus Wales, and the extent to which there is tracking of where the students go, what courses they go on, what they drop out of. And as a result of that, there is certainly in England an incentive for colleges to enroll kids on courses, get all the financial flow of funds for that. Then they drop out, and then there's no tracking. So what you have at one level is also a real, an incentive for colleges to enroll kids for whom that may not be the right answer. We're saying in Scotland, where there's much tougher tracking, you as a college have no incentive to enroll a kid for whom that's not the right answer, because if they drop out after a month, it's spotted, and you're going to receive some financial penalties for it. Whereas in England, you've got this attractive function of colleges encouraging to come, which may not be the right thing, and then the repulsive function of a benefit system, A, an opaque apprenticeship system, and B, financial penalties for the apprentices. So you get a lot of people ending up choosing the wrong decision because they're financially encouraged within the household to do it. And particularly in England, there's a little bit of unwarranted pull from college, or incentive for colleges to pull people in and not be discriminating enough about who really should come on this course, because it doesn't cost them to have dropouts. So these are where system thinking is really important. I think certainly where I think the top of the shop in DWP is recognized, but organizationally it's very difficult for it to happen. That's one of the reasons why us and others, I think, could be quite useful in looking across the piece to find these stories. And one reason why our next piece of work is on the other end of the age spectrum, looking at older workers and what's happening to them as they navigate, do I have enough national insurance credits? Do I want to get back into work after the kids have left house? Do I need to get back into work because I'm now on my own and I don't have an income? Can I leave work early because, I've had 35 years of backbreaking work? Can I extend my working life because I want to stay occupied and, I don't have a great pension? Let's try to think through, okay, again, we should officially be, as it were, neutral, trying to make sure that people are making the right decision for themselves. So that's our current focus is taking a very similar lens to the other end of the working age spectrum. Well, leave it at that. I'm sure you've got plenty of questions.
Thank you very much, Steve. Well, a really fascinating and very important piece of work. Have we got any questions for them, or Laura?